So you start doing research and you see terms like gain and exposure and class systems. What does all this mean? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, I'm Jeff. Welcome to my channel, 14ers for Beginners, where I want to help you reach the top of your first few 14ers. No matter where you're at, I hope that this information helps you get from there to the top of your first 14er. And this is helpful to you, it's inspiring, and I certainly just want to be a blessing. And so if this has been, hit like, hit subscribe. If you have questions, drop those in the comments below. Be happy to help out as much as I can. So you go on to a website or you find a book or an article or something, and they're talking about things like a class rating system or exposures or rockfall risk or route finding difficulties or level of commitment, elevation gain, these kind of terms. What do these mean? How do these matter to us? What do we need to pay attention with these as we're making decisions about our first 14er? Well, let's start with the class system. The class system runs 1 through 5, and basically 1 is the easiest, 5 is the most difficult. Thinking about our first few 14ers, we want to stay in classes 1 and 2. Okay. Essentially, class 1 is easy hiking, pretty straightforward. It'll be well-maintained trail, a well-marked trail. So that's just very straightforward hiking, nothing too difficult about it. Class 2 is going to be a little more difficult, probably a little more slope, a little more difficulty in that way. Maybe portions not quite as well marked, particularly like towards the top of a mountain. Maybe it's on a boulder field, something like that, where you're going to have to look for things like cairns or just find your own way around. Knowing where you're headed, those sort of things are class 2 markings. You will probably might need to use your hands a little bit on some boulders, things like that. There will be probably some minimal exposure and maybe some loose rocks in places, and that's generally class 2. Class 3 will involve more what we call scrambling, which is using our hands on all fours, kind of unroped climbing, if you will. We would expect to see a little more exposure, a little more risk, a little more danger, a little more difficulty, those sort of things, more steepness, more rocky terrain, maybe a little more kind of climbing we might think of. You're going to have to be a little more confident in your navigation skills to kind of connect the dots on these kind of trails, at least in portions. And anything class 3, 4, or 5 is going to require a helmet. Class 4 then is much more steep, more dangerous, will require both up climbing and down climbing, which can be difficult. And then you should probably have a rope with class 4. And this is true climbing, not hiking. And so you may have a portion of a hike where it's a lot of class 1 and 2, and maybe there's a section of class 4 or something like that. That's what this kind of section is. That's a much more difficult section. And then class 5 is just very steep, very dangerous, a lot more risk, ropes probably required, that sort of setting right there. And so as we talk about what do we want to start with, we really want to be aiming at class 1 and 2. If you find a mountain that's really interesting to you and it maybe has a small section of class 3, I wouldn't necessarily throw it out just for that reason, but I would certainly be careful. I would not overextend yourself here right away. Just get a couple under your belt, make sure you understand what you're doing, and then you can start exploring upwards in the class system if you like. When we talk about exposure, we're talking about what is your fall risk, meaning your exposure to heights, to cliff sides, those sorts of things. So exposure is your fall risk, okay? Another one is rock fall potential. This is your risk of rock falling on you. So this is more like the cliffs above you, whereas exposure is the cliffs below you, okay? So usually on class 1 and 2, those are both pretty minimal, but you're going to look at those. Those usually are on a scale of like high, medium, low, those sort of things, how they describe those. Route finding, that is how much of the trail is not going to be super clear. Sometimes like on class 1 and 2, it's usually very, very clear. Maybe they have rocks or logs or things beside it. Very, like, there's no mistaking where we're going here. When we talk about less clear route finding, it's like a boulder field or something like that, where it all looks the same. There may be a little more kind of worn, areas than others where you can connect the dots, but really you're going to have to know where you're going based on your research, and maybe use cairns and things like that to help direct your path. Another thing you're going to see is commitment. Commitment level is like how easy is it to turn around? Once you get going on this, are you you got to see it through kind of idea. And so sometimes that's just sheer length. Sometimes that is you get into really narrow areas with the high exposure and route finding and those sort of things. So that's something to pay attention to of the level of commitment that's required. You're going to see terms like gain, elevation gain, slope, those sort of things. These are all saying similar things where the gain is the vertical distance you're going to gain. So you can take your round trip distance and maybe it's 7 miles. Well, your gain is 3,000 feet. So you know that over that 7 miles, you're going to go up 3,000 feet. So those are good numbers to have. Of course, then you can calculate slope and incline and those sort of things off of that, so that you know what you're getting into at different portions, whether it's gentle or really steep or maybe even downhill in sections, those sort of things like that. So this is kind of information you're going to find where they're trying to give you an idea, a really educated picture of what that hike looks like, so that you absolutely know what you're getting into. And so I'd encourage you, when you see those portions, when you see those kind of informational boxes in different places, if there's terms you don't know, go research them, because that information is there for a reason, and you don't want to put yourself in an unwise position. So I hope this is helpful. And again, if you have more questions about what they're meaning with different terms, please drop those in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer. And as usual, I hope I get to see you at the top.